Good morning, everyone. My name is Helena Guerra Vicente. I'm today's discussant. I'm a professor at the Linguistics, Portuguese and Classical Languages Department at UNB, Universidade de Brasília. I'm also the coordinator of the Linguistics Graduate Program at Universidade de Brasília, and I'm a member of the Syntax Committee of Abralim, the Brazilian Linguistics Association. You're watching Abralim ao vivo, Linguists Online, an initiative of Abralim, designed to give students and researchers free access to state-of-the-art discussions on the most diverse topics related to the study of human language. Today, I'm pleased and honored to present our guest speaker, Caterina Bonan, who holds a PhD in general linguistics from the University of Geneva, Switzerland. Her research has focused on Romance comparative syntax, dialectology, creolistics, syntactic theory, and linguistic change. Bonan's doctoral dissertation, defended in 2019 under the supervision of Professor Urszlonski and the co-supervision of Professor Giuliano Botti, explored the morphosyntax of Northern Italian WH questions, and she had since been working on an implementation of her theory of WH in situ. Bonan is at present a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Cambridge in the United Kingdom, where she works with Adam Ledgway on a project supported by the Swiss National Science Foundation called The Fine Structure of Romance Interrogative It Clefts. In this talk, entitled Low Focus Movement in Romance, Bonan discusses a number of occurrences of clause internal WH elements and low focalisations in Trevisan, a Northern Italian dialect. These, she claims, have non-negligible consequences for the theory of Romance, WH in situ, and more generally for our understanding of different instantiations of focus. So, let's welcome Caterina Bonan. Caterina?
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, thank you for the introduction. I will share my screen now. There you go. You should be able to see the slides. Can you confirm that? Okay, so I'll start. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. In today's talk, I will explore the syntax of the low movement of WH elements and foci in Romance, and more precisely in Northern Italian dialects. This movement, as I will argue, is relevant both for the theory of Romance WH in situ and beyond, so for the general theory of WH in situ. Okay, so this is the result of research done at the University of Geneva in Switzerland during my PhD program, supported by funds to Urszlonski, and has been completed here at the University of Cambridge, supported by funds to myself by the Swiss National Science Foundation. Just to let you know what this is going to be about, I will start from telling you very quickly what has been claimed over the years in the literature on Northern Italian WH in situ. Then I will characterize 3 different types of WH in situ. And I will also provide novel evidence of both the low movement of WH elements and the low movement of foci in a Romance variety spoken in the Veneto region, northern Italy. Based on this, I will outline my theory that I call of WH to foc. That is a theory of low focus movement that targets the periphery of little VP. And then finally, I will show you rather briefly that this theory can, and I believe should, be extended to many more languages. So it's not language specific. It's not just intended for Trevisan or Venetan or Northern Italian dialects. I believe that with language specific minor adaptations, this theory can account for the whole phenomenon of WH in situ. So for those of you who are not familiar with the theory of Northern Italian WH in situ, let me say that two different syntactic approaches have been proposed over the years, namely one elaborated by Munaro, Poletto and Pollock, and then another elaborated by Manzini and Savoia. So these are the two, I'd say, mainstream approaches to the syntax of Northern Italian WH in situ. In a nutshell, what Munaro, Poletto and Pollock have claimed is that what looks like WH in situ is actually the result of movement, and of a movement that targets the high left periphery of the clause, okay, Rizzi's periphery. The reason why at spell out we get an ordering that looks like WH in situ is that this WH movement is followed by further movements into the high left periphery, so to higher functional projections, and because of this, the movement of the WH element is masked. Conversely, for Manzini and Savoia, the whole phenomenon of Northern Italian WH in situ can be understood as a very canonical instance of scope construal. Let's say WH in situ a la Huang 1982. So the WH element is indeed in situ at spell out, and then it moves, but it moves at LF. Although I will not address the technicalities of these analyses here, I just want to say that the theory that I present in a way challenges both approaches. And this mainly because of new empirical evidence that I discuss and then model. There you go. So let's start today's discussion from an overview of what WH in situ can look like. A first type of WH in situ is the one that I call pure WH in situ. Okay, this can be exemplified using an example like the Chinese example in one. So in this presentation, when I say Chinese, I mean Mandarin Chinese. So in this language, generally, when you want to ask a question of the type, who did you see? The only possible order available to you is the one in 1A, so you saw who, okay, with the WH element that stays in the external merge position. Indeed, fronting of the WH element before LF is not possible. Languages of this type include present-day Chinese, present-day Japanese, Sinhala, and other languages. It must be noted that some authors have argued that in some cases, in languages like Chinese, WH fronting, so total fronting into the high left periphery, Rizzi's periphery, is felicitous. So I'm perfectly aware of that. However, Chinese WH fronting is by no means the default interrogative strategy in this language, and often carries some kind of pragmatic or semantic flavor. And therefore, I think that the classification of the language as a pure in situ language can be maintained nonetheless. Now, a second type is the one that has become known as optional WH in situ, okay? Which can be, in some cases it's an instance of real optionality, and in some other cases, again, it has the two strategies, so WH fronting and WH in situ, have some kind of semantic or pragmatic specialization, okay? But regardless, in some languages, you can use both strategies. An example of this is French. I've used French because I think that most of you might know it. So in the language, we can have the Chinese-like structure, t'as vu qui? Have you seen whom? And also you can have the one that was impossible in Chinese, qui t'a vu? There you go. In this case, it is fine. So languages of the sort include French, a lot of Northern Italian dialects, and even though to a more limited extent, also Brazilian Portuguese, European Portuguese, Spanish, and other languages. A third type of WH in situ is the one that I work on, which is what I call fake WH in situ. It means that the WH elements stay close internally, but they move. So they are not in the external merge position. They surface in an internal merge position, which is low. Okay, and these type of languages can be both of type 1, so pure WH in situ languages, or type 2, so languages in which you have not only low fronting, but also fronting into the high left periphery. A language of this sort is Trevisan, so this Venetan dialect on which I've been working on for a lot of years now. So this is a language of type 2. You either have fronting into the low periphery, which is, today's topic, but you can also have fronting, total fronting into Rizzi's periphery. So in this language, you get to have interrogative orderings, such as the one in 3. Gega tu dato chi a teca? So have you given to who the saucepan? Meaning, who did you give the saucepan to? Okay, so my claim is that in this language, the WH element moves, low, as you can see here on the screen. Okay, and so this kind of low movement has received very few mentions in the literature on Romance WH in situ, despite being a very robust phenomenon in many languages of the world. Okay, so as for Romance, Cato, in her work on Brazilian Portuguese, posited that a low movement of the sort exists in Brazilian Portuguese. Then a brief mention was made by Belletti in 2006 concerning the possibility to have this movement in French. Manzini too in 2014 had this intuition that maybe Belletti's foc in the low left periphery might be involved in the derivation of Northern Italian WH in situ, although she didn't have supporting evidence to support this claim. And then very recently, I've just read the paper, Bonan and Crocco proposed that WH element can target this low position also in some cases in Italian. Now, one of the reasons why I'm presenting here today is that Cato, as I've just said, has claimed that this low movement, okay, so a low movement of the sort in 3, is at play also in Brazilian Portuguese. And I would really like to work and extend my theory to this language, if possible. So during the question time and also afterwards, if you have questions or suggestions, just do not hesitate to contact me, okay? I also have a paper on the matter, and so if you're interested, I can share that with you. I will be very glad to do so. Okay, so let's now look at this slow movement more closely. Okay, so I have told you that this movement, so the movement that we saw for Trevisan, is a robust phenomenon cross-linguistically. And when I say that it has been attested and discussed for many languages, I mean a lot. So Indo-European, Indo-Aryan, Dravidian, Niger-Congo, Sino-Tibetan, Koreanic, and Japonic varieties at the very least, okay? But for some reasons, we haven't really taken the existence of this low movement into account in the theory on Northern Italian and Romance WH in situ. And so this is a movement that, as you can see the title of the slide, Chang and Bayer have described as a typologically interesting and significant type between full moving and in situ languages. Again, some languages have type 1. So in this case, that would be, for example, remember type 1 is the pure type. So Old Japanese in the Nara period, ancient Chinese and other. And then type 2 has been observed, so the one that coexists with total fronting into the high left periphery. It's been attested in another stage of Old Japanese. It's been attested in Farsi, Malayalam, Hindi Urdu, Agam, Brazilian Portuguese. I mean, at least it's been claimed that it works so. And then, of course, my work on Trevisan. Now, what type of movement are we talking about? So the different people who have worked on this movement cross-linguistically have in turn described it as a focal movement or a WH movement, okay, which targets, depending on the author, Belletti's FOC, so Belletti's focus projection in the low left periphery, or the specifier of little VP, the edge of little VP. So depending on the author and, you know, also the period when the paper was written. But I think that we're more or less all talking about the exact same position. So in my case, I adopt Belletti's periphery of the LISO VP, so that she proposed in work from 2004. Okay, so it's a periphery that features two topic projections that surround a focus projection. Today, I will only deal with the focus projection. Okay, so but this is more or less the structure of what I think we have above little VP. Let me now show you how WH interrogatives, so answer-seeking WH interrogatives, work in Trevisan. I will also show you what echo questions look like, but in a second. So let's go back to have you given to who the saucepan. So this is an answer-seeking question. You have you should see my arrow here. So you have gatu, that's subject-critic inversion, okay, which is compulsory in the answer-seeking interrogatives of the language. Okay, gatu, have you, and then movement of the WH element. Now, the possibility to have an unmoved WH element exists, but in that case, what you get is an echo question, okay? And if you look here, the echo questions of Trevisan, in a way, behave like the echo questions of English. So in the case of an echo questions, you don't get inversion of the subject, okay? There's no interrogative syntax altogether. As I told you, also the possibility of fronting the WH element to the high left periphery. So akige gatu dato atecha, have you give, sorry, to whom have you given the saucepan? Same meaning. It is possible, but I will not be dealing with it today. I'll just show you my story for WH in situ. Okay, so that's possible. Well, yeah, it's real optionality. There are only two minor exceptions. One is what, one of the two what words, okay? And the other is perché, which is a regular Y word in the sense of Ricci 2001 or Stepanov and Tsai 2008, okay? Generated in the left periphery, no subject inversion. I have a paper with Shlonsky on that if you're interested. A few questions that the order that we have just seen. So have you given to whom the saucepan? Okay, so a few questions might rise about, why this order. So the first question that I'm sure you're asking yourself is, well, are we sure that indirect object followed by the direct object is not the base order of Trevisan, for example? Spoiler alert, I will tell you that no, this is not the base order. And so if the ordering is derived, okay, so if what we have is direct object followed by indirect object, how come that in interrogatives the indirect object precedes the direct object? Okay, so of course there are two possibilities. One possibility is that, you move the indirect object higher than the direct object, and the other possibility is that you move the direct object, somewhere after the indirect object in the phonetic string. We will see which is the correct one. And then I believe that another question could be, how come that the surface how come that the past participle surface is higher than the direct object? And I'm sure that those of you who know Italian already know the answer, but if you don't know Italian, I will be telling you how this works in a few slides. So the base unmarked declarative order of Trevisan declaratives is as follows. Take the example in 10. Gli ho dato I pomi a Gianni. So direct object followed by indirect object. It means I gave the apples to John. So the possibility to have gli ho dato a Gianni I pomi is out. Similarly, when you have an adverbial, and here I've used an adverbial of time and one of place, okay, so yesterday night to the festival. When you have adverbials, they must surface after the arguments, okay, in the base declarative order. So, go mangiare gnocchi ieri sera a Sagra. I have eaten yesterday night. I have eaten gnocchi yesterday night at the festival. This is the right order, okay? If you switch the order between the place adverbial and the time adverbial, I mean, you get to understand the sentence quite easily, but it's a bit degraded. While if you have, the time adverbial or the place adverbial before the direct object, then that's completely out. Now, with this in mind, you might now be wondering whether the ordering that we have just seen might be, let me show you something else before, I'm sorry. So these orderings, okay, were the declarative unmarked orderings. Sorry for the confusion. Now, the same orderings are not possible in interrogatives, okay? Let me show you this. So in the case of interrogatives, look at 12a. Vi dato chi pomi? So have you given to whom the apples, like literal translation? In this case, okay, you get the indirect object before the direct object. And similarly, gatto mangia quando gnocchi a Sagra? Okay. You get the adverbial that precedes the direct object. Okay, so different ordering in the unmarked interrogative. So again, how do we derive these? Is it the indirect object that moves, and in this case, the adverbial that moves? Or is it the case that what follows is moved to the right of the WH word? Well, my understanding of the phenomenon is that what moves is the WH element. So first of all, it is not possible to analyze these, let's say, post-WH material as being right dislocated. Let me show you why. So in Trevisan, right-left dislocation is always looks like the one that we have in 14. So the constituent that is dislocated is pronounced as, is phrased as an independent intonational phrase. So, gato dato aqui, gato dati aqui, ipomi, you know, with what used to be called a comma intonation. So, phrased independently. And then you must have a clitic co-indexed with the displaced element. And finally, when the past participle is present, you need gender and number agreement on the past participle as here. Now, given that we cannot have, given that the material that follows the WH element in our questions is not critically right dislocated, we might want to look at these questions now. So this should support further what I was claiming, okay? So, Gigature Gaia quando a Maria l'anel? Out. Gigature Gaia quando l'anel a Maria? Fine. So in this case, there is no right dislocation. You can see it because you don't have the clitic anywhere, okay? And in this case, the only ordering that is felicitous, I'm sorry, it disappeared. Here I am. The only felicitous order is the one in which quando moves higher than the direct object, but then the direct object and the indirect object surface in their base position, okay? If you displace what follows the WH element, so if you critically left dislocate the direct object, mind there's the clitic here, okay? What you get is that the relative order between the direct object and the indirect object becomes completely irrelevant, okay? So in these cases, the WH element is, I will say, moved, okay, as usual, but you dislocate what follows, and you can see it because you have the clitic, but you can also see it because then you can have both indirect object, direct object, or direct object, indirect object. Both are completely fine. Okay, so I hope that you're convinced that what follows the WH element is not critically left dislocated. So we might not wonder whether what follows the WH element is in fact marginalized, okay, in the sense of Cardinaletti, Same Clodovici, Antinucci, and Cinque before them. So for these authors, low focalizations in standard Italian are in situ, okay? And the material that follows a low focus can be either marginalized, okay? So marginalized means the focus is in the base position, the marginalized element that follows is in the base position, and it is distressed, okay? And you can see this because all, in this kind of configuration, all relations that require C command are maintained. Then there's a second type of case that you can have in Italian. So the element that is focused is dislocated, is in situ, and then what follows is dislocated but without a clitic, okay? And in this kind of configuration, the configurations, the relations that require C commands are completely lost, okay? So could it be that this is what we have in those interrogatives that we're working on? Well, no, I don't think so. So if you remember that those orders that we saw before, so I told you in interrogative, in declaratives, for example, in direct object is out, you always need to have the direct object before the indirect object, and same for the adverbials. Now, what I claimed was valid for unmarked out of the blue sentences, okay? Indeed, those orders, so the ones in which the indirect object or the adverbial precedes the direct object, are fine. But in those cases, okay, these are only fine when either the indirect object or the adverbial are focalized, okay? So contrastively focused. So you can actually get this kind of ordering in Trevisan. Che ho dato a Gianni pomi, meaning I gave, it is to John that I gave the apples, not to Vincent, for example. Okay, so if the indirect object is focalized, you can have it there. And same for the adverbials. Go mangiai ieri sera gnocchi. So I ate yesterday night gnocchi, meaning not Saturday night, okay? So yesterday night here is contrastively focused, and it can precede the direct object. However, these orders in Trevisan cannot be understood as a consequence of a marginalization or a non-clitic right dislocation of what follows the focused element here, and then I will extend the story to WH elements too. Indeed, there you go. Look at the example in 18. So here you have Gianni Legaregaya Albocha el suo putinot. So John gifted, well, I translated gave, but yeah, nonetheless, one or the other. So John gave to the boy his doll, okay? With his referring to the subject of the utterance, not to the focused element. Okay, and it means, okay, he gave the doll to the boy, for example, as opposed to the girl, not to the girl, okay? So that albocha in 18 is not able to bind the direct object el suo putinot, so the doll, is an indicator here that the former is in an internal merge position. Okay, so if it was in its external merge site, it would have canonical binding properties contrary to fact. Now, since that close internal foci surface in an external merge position, okay, the post-focal material here cannot be marginalized or in situ, cannot be marginalized or non-clitically left dislocated, because those kinds of configurations need the focused element to be in the base position, which here, okay, is not the case. Additionally, the fact that the subject in the canonical subject position is able to bind the possessive here means that there is C command, okay? So my analysis of these facts is that the indirect object here is moved from the base position. It is in an in an internal merge position, while what follows is in the base position, okay, and has canonical binding properties. Conveniently, the binding relations that I've just talked about are also replicated in interrogatives. So, Gegea domanda a chi è su Putinot, meaning he asked to who his doll, okay? In this case, to who is moved, it cannot bind what follows. What follows is only bind by he, okay? This is a case of subject-critic inversion. It means has he, and this he is the only possible binder for his doll. Okay, so I think that this is a clear indication that what we have is a moved WH element or a moved focused with what follows in the base position. And note that I think that these cases also support further my claim that the Trevisan base order is direct object followed by the indirect object and not the other way around. So to summarize, okay, here you have the VP, little VP, okay, given the saucepan to whom. So what we know that is that, okay, the WH element moves, and then of course I'd say same goes for psi. So the WH element moves to this position that I've already said is Belletti's Fock, okay, so higher than the little VP. I'm sorry, the structure is not complete, but I've had to cut it here and there for reasons of space. Okay, and now we need to understand what goes on with the past participle, okay. We might think that it moves higher than Fock, but to which position? Okay, we will try to characterize this movement in a second. I am sure that the movement of the active past participle will seem completely normal, let's say, to those who are familiar with Italian and Cinque's work. Indeed, in 1999, Cinque showed that adverbs are not just adjuncts, as we used to think, and indeed they are located in the specifiers of rigidly ordered functional projections within what we used to call the IP. And very importantly for us, what Cinque claimed is that in Italian, the active past participle moves to the head, to the left of tutto, okay? So it moves higher than the functional projection whose specifier hosts tutto, all. So something along the lines of 20, okay? You have what I call functional projection 1, and then with tutto in the specifier, and then a higher functional projection, okay? Here, functional projection 2. And that's where, okay, you have, that's the position targeted, okay, by the movement of the active past participle. Of course, in languages in which you don't have this kind of movement, so for example, French, you will get the opposite order. So in Italian, you have eaten everything, and everything eaten would be the order in languages such as French and other. A similar behavior can be observed in the case of the Trevisan active past participle. So I'm showing this to you using tutto and ben, which are two adverbials that I think most of us agree are located very low in the functional portion, that is functional portion for adverbs, okay? They are in the functional part that we call the low adverb space. So if you take tutto, it confirms what I've just said for Trevisan, so it behaves like Italian. The ordering is she has eaten, eats all, and no, all eaten, okay? Aloga magna tutto versus aloga tutto magna, which is out. Same goes with ben, aga magna ben il pometto, aga ben magna el pometto is completely out, so she ate the applesauce well, okay? So in both cases, you see that the active past participle moves higher than these two, than the position in which these adverbs are generated. Okay, so, okay, same as I said before. We have the same movement that we observed for Italian. Now, take the example in 24. Nogogo mi ha dato tutto, okay? Here I'm using what? Tutto. So you have the little VP. You have tutto, which is very low in the low adverb space, as I told you. And you have mia. Mia is like Italian mica. It is a presuppositional negator, which I think is widely acknowledged to mark the border, the upper border of the low adverb space. So let's say it's the higher adverb, the higher element that you can find in the low adverb space. So this means that the position targeted by the past participle, as you can see, is in between the low position of tutto and the high position of mia. So somewhere, okay, in the middle of the low adverb space. So what I have said in my, claimed in my articles is that it moves to the head that is called aspectual prospective by cinque. But so let's say, I believe it is cross-linguistically, it is the projection where the counterparts of almost are merged, okay? So most important thing, somewhere in the middle of the low adverb space, okay? So now this was a negation, okay? So an exclamative. If you move to a question, you get this kind of order. Che ho dato a chi? So who did you give it to? So what do we have here? We have dato, okay? Remember that dato is in the low, somewhere in the low adverb space. And so to who must be lower, possibly, you know, lower than the low adverb space. This is confirmed by the interrogative in 26. Che ho dato tutto a chi? Okay, if you insert tutto here, you see that the landing site of a key, okay, of the WH element is lower than the low adverb space, okay, and this I think is evidence that what is targeted is the periphery of little VP. So there you go, little representation. The active past participle moves to a functional projection, a spectral projection. You have mia, here you have tutto. And there you go, what I've just said. The indirect object WH element moves to the low left periphery. Okay, so this is my claim. The low, in languages like Trevisan, low WH elements are in the periphery of little VP, and I think that the data are rather clear. Let's characterize this movement. To do so, I will show you more in detail the parallel with foci. So in Trevisan, if I want to, you know, correct something that the person I'm talking to says, I will need to do as follows. So someone says, so che te prestato il tuo libro a Piero, meaning, oh, I know that you lent your book to Piero. If I want to correct this, I need to say, che ho prestato a Tony il libro, no a Piero, okay? The order, che ho prestato il libro a Tony, no a Piero, is very weird, very marginal, okay? So it is not this ordering. So the good order is the same that we saw for WH elements, so indirect object followed by direct object. In the case of foci, it is not completely out, okay, to have the base order, but that I think is a contact phenomenon because all speakers of Trevisan also speak Italian, they are bilingual, and since Italian has foci in situ, this could be the reason why the base order is not that bad. It is never ever the preferred order, never ever the one that it's uttered when we elicit, okay, the focalization. But then if you ask for grammaticality judgments and you present that to your speakers, they're going to say, yeah, that's fine, it's not bad, okay? Or I don't like it a lot, but it's you know, way better than an interrogative in which you don't move the anti-WH element. In those cases, everyone has a very strong feeling that the order is not fine. Okay, so movement of the past participle, movement of the focus. Exact same story that we saw for WH elements. For those of you who know Italian, Belletti in 2004 proposed, posited the existence of this periphery on which I'm now working, because she observed that in Italian, in the answer of a question that bears on the subject, you get subject inversion structures. So while in Italian the order is normally subject, verb, object, or subject, verb, in this kind of contexts, what you get is systematically verb, subject. So Belletti's claim was, well, in those cases, the subject is not in the canonical subject position. It moves to the focus, the low focus position. Okay, so same story for informational foci in the case of Trevisan. So if I ask, chi c'est che arriva? So who arrived? You can only answer arriva Gianni, arriva un tosato. So a young man arrived, okay, but with the order arrived John or arrived a young man, okay, with this kind of subject inversion. And Gianni arriva, un tosato arriva is out. So again, we see that there might be something. There is movement here, okay? It's the same thing that was posited for Italian in this case is there too in Trevisan, and I think it supports what I've said before for foci and WH elements. So again, Gianni is moved here, and Riva, of course, is moved to our aspectual projection. If you're not convinced, because in those cases you can't really, you just see that the subject doesn't move to the canonical subject position, but you don't really get to see the movement. Well, take a question like 33. A chi hai dato I pomi? To whom did you give the apples? Or I could say, of course, vi dato chi pomi, with the order that we saw before. In that case, you get to see the movement. Vi dato a Gianni pomi. Okay, that's the only possible order when the question bears on the indirect object. So in this case, you see the I see, yeah, you get to see the arrow. In this case, you see that again, we have this movement of the indirect object past the direct object. Okay, so this confirms, I think, the informational focus too is not in situ in Trevisan, okay? And I hope you're convinced that both WH elements and foci target the specifier of focus in the low left periphery. If you don't like focus, if you don't like the analysis by ability, let's just say that little VP is a phase, there's a periphery there, whatever the form, that's the position that's targeted. There you go, both WH elements and foci. This is in line, okay, with theories of WH element and of focus, movement, and interpretation. Here I'm citing Horvath, but many more after her have claimed, have made similar claims, and namely that when languages have a special position for contrastively focused constituents, these should, okay, or most cases is available for WH elements, okay, and this is what we have. Now I know that, you know, delinked and non-delinked WH elements, lexically restricted or not, do not have exactly the same semantics, and also it is not the case that all foci are the same, okay, but let's say that what we're dealing with is a position, or maybe more than one position, that encode something that can go under the general label of focus, okay? Maybe there are more than one, okay, because it's not really easy to put everything in the same bag. But let's say that is what we're dealing with is a projection or a field related to something that can be broadly described as focus, okay? Now, the theory of WH2 foc, how does it move? So features. Which features are involved in the derivation of answer-seeking WH interrogatives? One, the framework that I have adopted over the years is one, I'm citing here Cable and Abo et Piao, is one in which WH elements are not needed in interrogatives for close typing. They're only there for their meaning, and then the close typing is made by a silent or phonetically realized question particle. So what is targeted by C, by the high left periphery, is Q, okay? And it's the fact that you put Q together and the WH with the WH element that makes the WH element suitable, let's say, for the WH question. So, okay, there are possibly more than one feature on WH elements, so they will probably have a WH feature that is activated in relatives, okay, because we know that they can be used in relatives and in exclamatives, for example. And then in the case of interrogatives, what I say is that what is activated is focus. So this is in line, let's say, with theories such as Chomsky 2005, you know, in which I think also in 1995, you already say that an element can have more than one feature, and then only the one that has an output effect is activated. And so in the case of interrogatives, what's active on the WH element is focus, okay? And Q, so the one that does the close typing, determines the scope of the WH element and is targeted by C, is Q, and that's on the Q particle. So very briefly, there are two ways to put together Q particles, which can be, of course, phonetically realized or silent, depending on the language, and the WH element in answer-seeking interrogatives. So one is what is called projection of Q, and the other one is what is called adjunction of Q. Now, we don't want to spend half an hour on this. Just for your understanding, the difference between the two is that in the case of projection of Q, Q, when it is targeted by C, moves to C together with the WH element. Okay, so what is commonly understood as pipe piping is actually QP movement. C targets the feature on the Q particle. Since the Q particle and the WH element are, a whole, they're displaced together, and you get WH fronting, for example, total WH fronting. In the case of an adjoined Q particle, what you have is a structure that can be split during the derivation. So the WH element gets to stay close internally, and the Q particle, this operator, is targeted by C, moves alone. So based on this, Cable singled out two different types of WH in situ. So in one case, you have projection of Q, which means that the Q particle and the WH elements move as a whole. And so this is the case of WH fronting in English, for example, okay, or WH fronting in Italian. The thing moves as a whole, overtly, you get WH fronting. If the whole thing moves covertly, you get WH in situ, okay? And in languages with phonetically realized Q particles, you get to see this kind of configuration. At spell out, both the WH element and the Q particle are in situ. The other case is the one such as, for example, Japanese and Korean. What do you have? You have Q adjunction, and so Q is targeted and it moves alone to the high left periphery. And so the WH element stays in situ, okay? And you get the Q particle high in the left periphery. That's exactly the case. You get to see it in Japanese and Korean, okay? Because the languages have phonetically realized Q particles. What I have claimed is that we have a third type of WH in situ, remember, the moved type. Okay, how is this done? This is what I call WH to foc. Okay, so you have an adjoining structure, which looks more or less like that. Okay, so this is your WH element that we saw before, a key. So here you have a key with the adjoined Q particle. In the step that I call WH to foc, what is targeted is the sorry, this is a mistake. So what agrees here, of course, is the WH phrase. Okay, is the focus feature on the WH phrase. So this agree arrow should go all the way, okay, to the WH phrase. So there is a focus agreement, and because there is some kind of movement triggering tool that you can call the EPP, or a requirement for agree plus move, the whole thing moves to the specifier of foc. Okay, and so that's what we get to see in Trevisan. And then, of course, since I follow these authors and say that Q needs to move to the left periphery, to the high left periphery, to determine the scope of the WH word that stays close internally, and to do the close typing, you have a second step, which is Q to focus, okay, to reach his focus. And in this step, what is targeted here is the Q feature on the Q particle, and the Q particle moves alone to the specifier of focus. Because of this analysis, I have proposed that we talk of interrogative feature scattering, okay, following this terminology that was used for other matters by Giorgi and Pianesi in the past. So what I'm saying is that there are languages that bundle Q and focus high in the high left periphery, and those are interrogative feature bundling languages. And then there are languages such as Trevisan that bundle the two that scatter the two features, and so you get Q in the high left periphery and focus in the low left periphery. Okay, so this is a scattering language. First step to check focus, and the second step to check Q. How can we extend WH to FOC? How does it work for the languages in which we clearly don't see movement, WHC to languages in which we don't see movement, and so on and so forth? Well, both cases are attested, okay? Languages that have low movement and languages that don't have it. And what we get to see, and we'll show this in a second, is that languages seem to evolve in the direction of agree only, which means that they start out as agree plus move, so they require WH to FOC, this slow movement. And then in their evolution, they move to agree only, so like real WH in situ. Old Japanese, for example, has been claimed, Old Japanese in the 8th century had interrogative low movement, which looks exactly like WH to FOC. So I won't read the examples, but you know, this is what it looks like. In present day Japanese, you would have the WH element, okay, here in the base position, while in Old Japanese, the WH element moved to FOC. And then this is first step of WH FOC. And then second step, ka, the Q particle that was already phonetically realized, moved to the high left periphery. So evolution, WH to FOC to real WH in situ. Nonetheless, we can think that the low focus agreement is still there, only there is no more a requirement for move, and so we don't get to see WH to FOC, we only have this low focus agreement. Very interestingly, in between the 9th and the 12th century, Old Japanese displayed an optionality. So you had both low movement and WH in situ. Okay, so this goes, this supports my claim that you can have, you know, optional stages, that they are not a problem at all for the theory. And at some point, you know, one or the other structure will be overgeneralized. So in here, what you see is that in the 8th century, you had movements all the time, WH to FOC, and then you moved to some kind of, you know, mixed setting, unclear setting where you could have movement or no movement, and then present day Japanese doesn't have movement at all. Same for archaic Japanese, which has been described by Aldridge as a language that moved WH elements to the edge of little VP. Okay, I think that this is compatible with my story. Okay, so the WH element would be in present day Japanese would have this WH element in the base position, while at the time it was still moved. What about contrastive foci? So present day, let me show you. Present day Chinese has the possibility to have contrastive foci in situ. So here you have, Lizzie does not like this book, okay, not, for example, that book, okay. And in this case, this precise type of, you know, prosodically marked focus can only be in the external merge position. Okay, it's not possible to move it higher, be it to the low left periphery or to the high left periphery. Okay, so what you get in present day Chinese is this. Okay, in present day Chinese, you only have, in the case of focus, and well, in the case of WH elements too, you only have focus agreement, okay, here with the low left periphery, and then no movement into the specifier of FOC. And conversely, in Trevisan, you still have the requirement for move following agree, and so, you know, focus agreement. I hope you get to see the arrow, focus agreement, and then movement of the focused constituent. So the parallel is the same movement or no movement for WH elements and foci, okay? So present day Chinese only agree. Ancient Chinese, old Japanese, and present day Trevisan agree plus move. Okay. Conclusions. I have many more examples, and if you want to read my paper or my forthcoming book, I can show those to you. But so for today, let me conclude my presentation. I think that this observation of the slow movement of Trevisan has consequences. For a very long time, we've worked on Northern Italian WH in situ, thinking that it was different from, it was typologically different from Asian WH in situ, for example. What I am claiming here is that they're not that different after all. What we have is just, you know, some kind of micro parameter, movement parameter that is set as positive in the languages like Trevisan that move to the low left periphery, and as negative in the languages that have real WH in situ. Chinese and Trevisan, or more in general, Northern Italian WH in situ, are not that different after all. So I think that this prediction, this claim of mine, is worth testing, not only in synchrony, but also in diachrony, because this pattern of evolution, you know, for those languages that make use, that scatter the interrogative features and make use of the low left periphery to derive interrogatives, the patterns are rather robust, and it's really nice, and it should be tested not only synchronically, but also diachronically, okay, to see whether all of the languages indeed evolve in the direction of agree alone. I think that we might want to reconsider the status of WH to FOC in many languages, Romance languages that we know of. And, you know, when we study this, I think that we should observe the behavior of adverbials, of indirect object, the surface position of foci, peculiar prosodic properties, and so on and so forth. And as I have already told you, I would be very happy to try to adapt Cato's discussion and analysis of Brazilian Portuguese WH in situ, you know, and see how and if we can make it fit into my theory. So that's, I think, next step. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Caterina, for your awesome talk. We will open up for questions now, so participants should write them down on the chat. In fact, we already have some questions.
Of course, tell me.
Yes, there's one by Justin Gaffney Samuels, and he says, good morning, and then he asks if the WH element placed, he asks if the WH element is placed in the same place in all Romance languages, or does it vary?
Hi, thank you for the question. No, I think it varies. So, for example, in Northern Italian dialects, what you get is both cases. So if you believe my story, you get both cases. You get languages that have agree plus move, And so they move the WH element into the low left periphery, and you get languages that have agree only. So they look like even more like Chinese, present-day Chinese and Japanese, and so they have real WH in situ. Nonetheless, since they compute everything related to focus down below in the closure domain, I think that they have indeed focus agreements, only they don't have movement. Okay, so they are Trevisan. So you have both Trevisan-like language that move, and you have Trevisan minus movement languages that do focus agreement but don't move the WH elements or the focus into the low left periphery.
Okay, there's another question by Achilles Descarineto. He says, lovely presentation, Caterina, greetings from Campinas. He says, your claim is that WH elements target the low focus position, namely Belletti's 1, in Trevisan. I followed the arguments on the raising of the active past participle. You've mentioned that, like in Italian, the Trevisan active past participle has to raise past tutto, everything, being actually placed among presuppositional negation mica and tutto. So the claim is that the low periphery in Trevisan is below tutto. The data in 26, dato tutto aqui, clearly supports your claim for the Trevisan landing site of the WH in situ element, that is, spec foc. But since French has no movement of the participle at all, that would mean that languages virtually differ regarding the height where the low periphery is merged. So the border of the phase varies. That's a question. So the border of the phase varies. Thank you very much. That's the question.
Thank you for the question. Hi, Achilles. So I believe that what we define as edge of little VP can vary cross-linguistically. So, you know, some kind of, depending on the language, in some cases, what is called the edge is literally little VP. And in other cases, such as that of Trevisan and languages of the sort, the limit of the edge is foc. And you get to see this when you do total fronting into the high left periphery, because as you know, you want to have successive cyclic movement. And if the WH element needs to check foc, you need to make it pass there. And so I think that in languages like Trevisan, successive cyclic movement passes through foc. And in languages that, you know, don't scatter the features, but check everything high, you have like a regular passage through the spec LISO VP. Okay, so yes, I believe that the idea of a phase can be dynamic, but in the case of French, I think that you've made the only you've mentioned the case of the only language that I know of in the Romance domain that don't have WH to foc at all. I don't think there's an active low left periphery in the language, and I think that what you have in French is a kind of WH in situ that looks closely like the Sinhala one. So where you have not a Q adjunction, but a Q projection, it stays in situ, nothing happens until LF. And at LF, you know, you have Q prefronting into the high left periphery. But so that's a case that's completely different from all the other cases that I know of. And Yes, I believe that the edge of the face can be dynamic. And so in some cases it's folk, in some other cases it's lower. But I don't believe that this is the case in French. I believe that in French there is no, at least if there's a low left periphery, there is no focus features there. It's not encoded there. Everything must be done higher up.
Okay, thank you. There's another question by Simone Gessi. She's trying to write it down on the chat, but she couldn't. So she sent it to me by WhatsApp.
Okay.
So she says, "Dear Caterina, thank you for your exciting talk. I'm studying Brazilian Portuguese, WH in situ, and I'm very interested in your theory. I have some comments about Brazilian Portuguese data. Consider the following sentences. Você deu para quem o livro? You gave to whom the book? Wait a minute, it's a bit confusing here. Okay. You gave to whom the book? Okay. Then letter B. Você deu quando o livro para Maria? You gave when the book to Maria. Then example 2A. Você deu o livro para quem? You gave the book to whom? To B. Você deu o livro para Maria quando? You gave the book to Maria when? In 1, the sequences that follow the WH element have topic intonation. The most common structures are the 1 and 2, where the WH elements stay in its external merge position. Besides, in Brazilian Portuguese, we do not find island effects, except for porque, that is why. See the contrast in 3 and 4. So 3 is, eles disseram que os clientes de quem não pagaram. Who have they told you the customers of haven't paid? And 4, de quem eles disseram, so 4 is ungrammatical. De quem eles disseram que os clientes não pagaram? That is, of whom they told that the clients did not pay.
So you don't want to have extraction out of islands.
Yeah, besides, in Brazilian Portuguese, we do not find island effects except for porque.
Yeah.
So based on these data, it seems difficult to assume an analysis along the lines of Cato to Brazilian Portuguese, right? I think, oh, she's saying that 4 is, Simone, you numbered 4 and 5, but you meant 3 and 4. So what you're saying is that what you numbered, number 5, is grammatical or ungrammatical? It's because she made a mistake.
Yeah, don't worry.
Yeah. But the question is, based on these data, it seems difficult to assume an analysis along the lines of Cato, 2013, to Brazilian Portuguese, right? I think that Brazilian Portuguese should be classified as Chinese-like. Oh, okay. So she's saying it's because it's misnumbered here. So, okay. So, de quem eles disseram que os clientes não pagaram is ungrammatical.
Yeah, so you need to have the WH element inside the island.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what she's trying to say is that it's difficult to assume an analysis along the lines of Cato. I think that Brazilian Portuguese should be classified as Chinese-like. It's a statement.
Yeah.
She's affirming.
Okay, so I think you're probably right. I also think that you might want to consider the possibility that the WH element might be moved into Belletti's focus projection, and what follows that you say has a topic intonation might be moved into the periphery of LISO VP, to this lowest, to the lowest topic projection. That's a possibility. But if it is not so, it is nonetheless compatible with my theory. So Brazilian Portuguese might not be like Trevisan, and it might only have a requirement for focus agreement, low focus agreement, and no requirement for move. So that's completely possible. As for the islands, I know that it is possible to have WH in situ inside of islands in Brazilian Portuguese, and that's the case in most Romance languages that I know of. And I think that you might want to work on the islands a bit more. My experience is that the judgments are often tricky, and it's not very easy to work on those. But what I've seen in Trevisan, and I discussed that in my dissertation, is that it seems to be the case that, the Q particle is involved in questions with islands as well, of course. And it seems to be the case that, it seems to be the case that WH words are bare, so they appear without the Q particle in strong islands, but not in weak islands. So you might just want to see whether there are differences between strong and weak islands, whether in all cases you get to have, phenomena of like subject of verb inversion, if you have those in some cases. But I think that your intuition is right, and I think that Brazilian Portuguese is Chinese-like. But yeah, those are just a few ideas of things to check to see what goes on.
So she's thanking you. Also, Achilles said thanks. Thank you for such a clear answer. And do we have any other questions? Well, I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm not a specialist on WH, but anyway, I think I might have some intuitions from Brazilian Portuguese. I don't know. So in today's talk, he talked about in situ questions, that is, that should be interpreted as echo questions. There's fronting, but you've chosen not to deal with it today. Mm-hmm. And there's slow movement for which you should expect yes/no answers. Mm-hmm. So in Brazilian Portuguese, when we have in situ, for example, você deu a panela para quem? Which was your example. You mm-hmm. gave the pan or the saucepan to whom? I could say that we could have two meanings. One is echo, okay, but then you have a different intonation, something like você deu a panela para quem?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what we have in Trevisan as well. Okay. We have a different intonation.
Yeah, okay. But then we have another possibility, which is você deu a panela para quem? Assuming you've given someone the pen, and now I want to know who this person is. Mm-hmm. So my question is whether, I think you are taking the overall role of intonation into account, because you've mentioned intonation in your talk. So maybe that's what I would like to know, if you're taking these intonational patterns into consideration in the case we have these two types of interpretations of meanings, like in Portuguese. And my question is, in Trevisan, do you have these this sort of ambiguity, or
So thank you for the question. I took the intonation into account in my thesis, even though I haven't really, worked on prosody like properly. But yes, the different intonations that you mentioned are there in Trevisan too, and we clearly see that. I mean, the intonation, the prosodic contour that is associated to echo questions, so those that you use to correct or to ask for, a repetition and so on and so forth, is the one that you mentioned for Brazilian Portuguese too. So we have the same intonation in Trevisan, while a completely different, I would say a neuter one, okay, for real answer-seeking questions in which you have that kind of movement. So yeah, it's this is something that I didn't mention, but echo questions have no subject-critic inversion, the WH element that stays in situ, so it doesn't move, and a completely different intonation with respect to answer-seeking questions. So the Portuguese pattern is seen in Trevisan as well. Yeah,
that's very interesting. Well, there are no further questions on the chat, but let me check my WhatsApp again. Perhaps. No.
I will answer on YouTube if they ask other questions, and no problems.
Okay, so everyone, do you have any other questions? I don't think so, Caterina.
That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the awesome talk. I've learned a lot today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.